Alright, hi. So this is my tutorial on how I did this lighting effect and just general tips for lighting. So I'm just going to go straight into it from the start. So the first thing you want is when you're drawing something is if you're drawing it from your imagination or from a reference image, you want to give it a really clear source of lighting and have really clear edges to your shadows to achieve this particular effect. Um, so something cel shaded usually has really clear lighting to it, and you can make it look more realistic later. It's actually a better place to start off from because it's so well defined. So this reference image clearly has really well defined shadows. So when I started off, I just did some basic blocking in, but from the very start, you want to make sure you know where your highlights and your shadows are going and to try and get the values right. So start in black and white. Make your reference image black and white so that you can understand the colors and the values easier. I want to be kind of done with the detail of the drawing before I start coloring it, but this is optional. If this feels a bit weird to the way that you usually do your drawing, that's fine. You don't have to take a completely rendered approach to it. You can apply these tips to your own personal style, but these are just the ones that work well for my style. So with the coloring, I used color layers to select certain parts. So something that I think is quite important is with the skin tone is something called subsurface scattering. Where the light meets the shadow on skin, you want a really saturated red. Or, well, it doesn't have to be extremely saturated, but you want it to be there. The shadows can be kind of desaturated. The highlight, it's obviously very white and it will be very desaturated, but the part where they meet needs to be quite, at least, double the or quadruple the saturation of the highlights, depending on your own piece. Play it by what you know looks good, because everyone knows what looks good. The trick is just stepping back from your own piece, looking at it with that critical eye, and making those decisions. I did this with some like a color layer and then a color burn layer. Do it however you want. So I basically drew along the edges and then with an airbrush added in some more puffy areas, usually on the nose and lips where there's lots of fat skin and not a lot of bone, and on the ears as well because they're usually redder. I also added some red in when I did the eye, just to add it on top. Always keep laying until you feel something's nice. It can be nice to pop in some airbrushy highlights into the shadows as well to give it a bit more depth. Just keep working on it, and keep adding where you feel like it's necessary. Don't be afraid to layer ridiculous amounts of stuff on top of each other. So something else I did that really changed it quite a bit is to add this sort of blue, probably about here, into the shadows. So the thing with skin tones is people assume that they're all reds to oranges around this range. But if you want to go more desaturated than the grey lets you, which I recommend because adding contrast and saturation is a great way to make an interesting skin tone, push it into the blues a little bit. I did add a slight blue colour to the hair because, nothing's usually just plain grayscale. But another thing I did was added a yellow colour wash onto certain areas so it adds a subtle gradient. Because I wanted white hair, I didn't want slightly blue or slightly yellow, so I used both so that it can stay white, but it's not completely this grayscale, boring looking photo. Um, the eyebrows were a kind of a design decision. Like, you can see them on the reference image, but you wouldn't be able to see them normally. And it kind of works with or without them. It's up to you. So the next step I did made a big change, but it was only 3 layers that made this change. I duplicated the base layer, I blurred it out with however you're supposed to say that thing, Gaussian blur or something, I'm sorry, and then made it on soft light at just a low opacity. You don't want to go too far. But that's essentially doing something called bloom. Now, I didn't use Procreate's inbuilt bloom feature because it wasn't quite what I was going for. Yeah, so the bloom feature that's inbuilt takes the sharpest highlights and blows them out, which is how bloom works. What I've done is made a sort of atmospheric, it also takes some of the darker colors and blurs them out as well. So I personally prefer my method. I did try both though. The trick is experimenting. Now the next thing is a big thing that you see in movie posters is blue and orange is a great color combination, and you don't see any blue and orange on this really yet. Well, fine, whatever. We do what we want because it's our art, so we're going to make it blue and orange. So with vivid light and a pretty high opacity on the blue at least because the orange came out a bit too vibrant. I just popped one on the left and one on the right, like using a clipping mask to this layer. It's not hard, but it adds so much. Like before, after, adds heaps. You can see the outfit is starting to loosen with its shading because it's too dark. That's okay, we'll fix that later. or we won't. I didn't end up actually fixing that. So the next one, we just add, because this has so many strong highlights, I really wanted to show that, so I added a dark background. And the last thing I did was quite simple, it's just an edge light. So you add this, usually pick a saturated color. I'll show you where it is on the color square, the disc for those so inclined. And just plopped it in easy, make sure it's got harsh edges, do not blend it out at this point, we'll do that later. And then just duplicated it, did that blur thing again, and put it on an add layer. That's a really, really simple way to add a lot of depth, and because the blue light from before was coming from that side, I made it blue. Do what you want, but essentially, so the basic steps, I think the most important ones is definitely adding that color, blue and red, blue and orange onto each side, and that subsurface scattering where the light meets the dark on the skin is really important. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. I realise now that I shouldn't have made the clothes that dark because all of the detail from before is lost. That's my bad, but you know, everyone makes mistakes and that's fine. So that's just my way of doing this particular one. You can choose other colours that fit your style better when you're doing those like big brushy colours all over it. Also, as a general tip, don't leave anything just plain black and white, because people will see it and think it looks a little bit ugly, but they won't know why, so they won't be able to tell you, and you might have been doing it this whole time and not noticed. Okay, also, I do go against like digital black, but I've completely fallen for it here. I think it's okay when it's in this gradient form, when it's coming in from an already dark place here, just down in a smooth gradient. If I stuck this digital black somewhere like in the middle of here, it looks awful. You can already tell that looks disgusting. Don't do that. Okay, that's the end of it. I hope this was helpful, and